well researched as the big five personality tests we discussed a minute ago, this one right here. But there is some similarities. But this is a great one for learning about yourself and how you interact with the world. So, with the Myers-Briggs type indicator assessment, it uses four different areas instead of five like the big five test to assess, and also is a spectrum from one side to the other for each one. So the four areas is introversion versus extroversion, sensing versus intuition, thinking versus feeling, and judging versus perceiving. So in the first one, if you're an extrovert, you gain energy more by being around other people, where introverts gain more energy by being alone. They find it draining to be around other people. So whichever one you gravitate more towards would make you an E or an I on this test. To give you an idea, this is where we're getting to, is these 16 different types using these acronyms. The second letter, sensing versus intuition. With sensing, you're very much into gathering information through your senses. You focus on facts and details. Where an intuitive person relies less on direct perceptions and more on their hunches. They just intuitively know things without necessarily having to research the facts and details. It's a more of a feeling. Now, I believe there's a typo on the slide. This, instead of it being an I, it should be an N. Because as you'll see here, the N, like INTFJ right here, that's intuitive. So that's a typo on the publisher's part. All right, going to the third of the four is thinking versus feeling. So if you're more feeling-based, you rely more on what's right and wrong based on what will affect other people's feelings. If you're more tend to be on the thinking end of the spectrum, you rely more on logic instead of feelings, so that you would get an F or a T there. And then for the last of the four letters in the type indicator is judging versus perceiving. So with judging, it's a focus on goals and deadlines, making quick decisions. We're perceiving people enjoy ambiguity and multitasking. They more likely miss deadlines and change their minds more often. So based on your kind of which you're naturally leaning toward each of those four areas, you'd get a certain type. And this gives you an idea of kind of how you interact with the world. There's a lot of great assessments online. You can take this test, and you can find all kind of websites that will give you a lot of detail. Once you know which of these 16 types you are, give you a lot of detail around that personality type and what works well for you, what you should work on, that kind of thing. All right, let's move on to the fourth area, values. So what are values? So it's a way of figuring out what your own values are is thinking about what matters to you, what's important to you, what are you proud of. Because values are what's kind of fundamentally important to you, and it's how you weigh your decisions, especially ethical decisions. There's a great quote by Mahatma Gandhi in the book here. It talks about your beliefs become your thoughts become your words become your actions become your habits become your values, and your values become your destiny. Kind of a neat quote to think about. But ultimately, there's two types of values. There's end values, also called terminal values. These are values around the kind of goals or outcomes that we personally think are worth pursuing. The other type of value are instrumental values. These are the type of behavior that we think are appropriate for reaching end goals. So the first one are values around what's worth pursuing or achieving. The second type, instrumental values, are around what kind of behavior is acceptable to reach our goals. To me, this is a little bit kind of like the whole, you may have heard the saying about, does the ends justify the means? To me, these two areas, this would be the ends, this would be the means. And we have to kind of determine what's important to us as far as the ends, what's important to us as far as the means, and which is more important, and help balance those. All right, so where do values come from? So we learn them from our culture, our family background, our personality, And each of these values can also be self-oriented versus other-oriented. So you may hold a certain value, but you may put more importance on that as far as how it applies to you, or you may focus more on how that applies to other people. Now, to give you some more examples of what would be considered an instrumental or end value, this chart shows a list of end values and a list of instrumental values. So remember, end values are things worth achieving, pursuing. Instrumental values are behavior to achieve goals. And this is a neat study where it ranked, based on a survey, the importance of each of these different values to different generations. So you have the boomers, you have Gen X, and Gen Y. All right, so values-based management. This is where you take the value thing and apply it to management. So as I mentioned, each of us have different values. There's different types of values, and how you balance them matters. So in value-based management, the idea is that our values should guide our behavior, ourselves, and the organization. And as a manager, it's your job to communicate to your organization, to your team, what your values are and what the organizational values are, because those values help the people you're managing to know what action to take in various situations. If they have a situation they need to take action on, make a decision on, if they know the values that are important to the organization and to you, they can use those as guiding principles to make the right decision without having to always ask you what to do. And you're empowering them to act in a way that's in alignment with the organization and its values. Now, also, as a manager, you have to find a balance between your self-oriented values and your community-oriented values. So you may have values about that you pertain to yourself, but if that's all you focus on, you're going to make decisions that are not good for the community of people and organization around you. You also need to focus on the values of impacts your the community around you. You need to find a balance between those things, your personal values and those of your more community-oriented values. Don't let your self-oriented values override the community-oriented values. You got to have a balance. Now, there are 4 values that are fundamental to be an ethical manager. First one is honesty, being truthful. Next one is accountability, which is taking responsibility. You don't take responsibility, that can lead to a lot of bad things. Third is trust. Do you put trust in those around you? You give someone a task and trust that they will do it. And finally is caring. All right. So I mentioned earlier how you have to communicate the values that are important to you and the organization to those around you as a manager. That communication is not just words, also has to be through your actions. Your actions show a lot, so you have to make sure you're communicating those values not just through your words, but through your actions. Now, to kind of sum this chapter up, which is all about becoming more self-aware, there's 4 different stages to becoming good at something, and that's the same also for becoming more self-aware. Ideally, we want to reach stage 4, which is unconscious competence, which is becoming so practiced at something that we can do it without thinking or effort. But there's 4 stages. There's stage 1 is unconsciously incompetent. Stage 2 is consciously incompetent. Stage 3 is consciously competent, and stage 4 is unconsciously competent. So this graph shows, the progression, but this slide here, this last slide, explains it the best. So for each of these terms, the first word has to do with whether it's conscious, which means requires thought and you're aware of it. Unconscious means you're not having to use thought and you're not aware of it. The competence versus incompetent refers to if you're competent, it means you're good at something. If you're incompetent, you're not good at something. So in stage 1 of most things, and with building self-awareness, we all start in a stage of unconsciously incompetent. So we don't have any competence yet with the skill, so we're not good at it yet, and we're just starting out. But we also lack an awareness that we're not very good at it. We don't know what we don't know. This is kind of the starting phase. Going to stage 2, we start to become conscious of what's required to do well. So we start to understand what's needed to do well, but we're still incompetent. So going back here, we're becoming consciously incompetent. We start to know what we don't know. In stage 3, as we practice more and get feedback, we're aware of how well we're doing. So in this case, we're becoming competent, and we're aware we're becoming more confident. In the last stage, the skill becomes integral to who we are. It occurs naturally without conscious thought or effort. So in this last phase, we're not only competent, but we're unconsciously competent, meaning that we no longer have to think about it. We do it automatically. That's the ultimate goal. So that's kind of the 4-stage process of growing any skill, but also applies into the context of this chapter with self-awareness. All right, so that's a quick summary of Chapter 2. Hope you found that helpful. If you have any questions, please reach out. I hope you have a great week.